Hey everyone. So in this video, we are going to go over Chapter 18, which is all about persona and tone. And I mentioned both of these terms in the previous lesson on Chapter 17, but here in this one, we're going to go into those in a little more detail. And I will say right up front that that persona and tone are a big part of your homework for this week, the Poetry 1 assignment. And the 6 poems that we're going to focus on in this PowerPoint are also part of your homework for Poetry 1. So very useful lesson right here. All right, let's go ahead and start on our PowerPoint. Okay. Oh, goodness. That is not where I wanted to be. From the beginning. Thank you. There we go. All right. So, what do we mean when we say persona? The persona of a poem is the speaker of the poem. Speaker of the poem is not the poet, right? When we read the poem and we know that these words are coming from someone, our instinct sometimes is to think that they're coming straight from the poet because after all, they did write it. But we can create personas, almost like creating the voice of a character. And we can, just like a mystery, thriller, science fiction, romance novelists create characters in their novels, a poet can create a character in the poem. That character is the persona, the speaker of the poem, right? So we never say, like in line 3 of this poem, the poet says, blah, blah, blah. No, it's the speaker, right? The poet wrote it, but this is a character. Just like when we are referring to, a novel, like we don't say, in chapter 3, Stephen King says, blah, blah, blah. No, we say in chapter 3, the character Eddie says, blah, 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 right? Same thing with poetry. There is a character created, a persona, right? What about tone? Tone in writing is just like tone of voice in speaking. And we know that sometimes how you say something is even more important than what you say. I could say something like, have a nice day. And it sounds lovely, sincere, perfectly nice. Or I could say, have a nice day. And it completely changes the meaning of what I've said. The change in tone alters the meaning, even though it's the same exact words. There is tone in writing also, just like anybody that speaks. We're going to learn a little bit more about tone here in the next few slides, but one type of tone that I kind of want to call to your attention right away is irony. Because verbal irony is used in poetry from time to time. And if you don't pick up on the verbal irony, it makes it hard to really be successful at understanding the poem. But verbal irony is kind of like sarcasm, It's where we mean the exact opposite of the words we speak, right? So if you're on the verge of tears and your friend says, you certainly look cheerful today, clearly they mean the opposite of the words they just spoke. Unless they're just not good on picking up on social cues, but I don't think that's normally the case. Usually it's that they are intentionally saying the opposite of what they mean. Just like my previous example when I said, have a nice day versus have a nice day, like it's not irony, but it's still meaning the opposite of what I said. Verbal irony is going to show up in poetry, and we need to know that it's there, if it's there, because if you miss it, you kind of miss the whole point of the poem. We will be looking at a poem that uses a bit of verbal irony, so this might start to make a little more sense once we take a look at that one. All right, so, but again, verbal irony is just one type of tone, right? There are just countless numbers of terms we could use to describe tone. And that sort of becomes the problem, is being able to verbalize what you think the tone is, finding the right word to describe it. Because even if it is ironic, if there is verbal irony, there are different levels of verbal irony as well. Like it could be a kind of gentle, playful irony, or it could be very bitter, mean and scathing. You have to, even within the realm of irony, you have to be able to come up with the right word to describe it, right? So here's a list of some pretty common tones that are used, especially in poetry. You can have a humorous tone, a joyous tone, a playful tone, a very light tone, a hopeful tone, very brisk tone, a celebratory tone, a wistful tone, a sad tone, mournful, dreary, tragic, solemn, somber, poignant, blasé, disillusioned, straightforward, hostile, sarcastic, cynical, ambivalent, ambiguous. You have to really think about what is the overall tone that the poem is giving off. And then thinking, okay, well, all right, it seems really happy. Okay, but is there like a more specific form of happiness that it's taking? Is it joyous? Is it playful? Because playful can come off as happy, right? Sounds happy. Okay, yes, but is there a more, can we get at something more focused, more specific, right? So even if you come up with, what you think the tone is, keep asking yourself, okay, but is happy just sort of like a big generalized term? Can I get more specific? Right? Okay, so we're going to look at the poem My Last Duchess, because we're going to start talking about persona. This is a great example of creating a persona in a poem. And if you have had me for English 200, you might remember this poem. I used it in one of the discussions for that class. Or maybe you have forgotten all about it. But we're going to go through it here real quick and talk about the persona that has been created in this piece. So it is called My Last Duchess by Robert Browning. Robert Browning is the poet. He is not the speaker. He is not the persona. We also get this little word here, Ferrara. That lets us know that this poem, wherever we're at, the location is in Italy, Ferrara, Italy. Right? Here's the poem. That's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now. Frau Pandolf's hands work busily a day, and there she stands. Will it please you sit and look at her? I said Frau Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance, but to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as they would ask me if they durst, how such a glance came there. So, not the first are you to turn and ask thus. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Frau Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-blush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one, my favor at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherry some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of 900 years old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling, even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one and say, just this or that in you disgusts me. Here you miss, or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, even then would be some stooping. And I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. There she stands, as if alive. Will it please you rise? We'll meet the company below then. I repeat, the Count, your master's known munificence, is ample warrant that no just pretense of mine for dowry will be disallowed. Though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Oh, notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse. Thought a rarity, which Klaus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. Weird, right? Yes, it's very weird. All right, so go back to our PowerPoint here. All right, so there is a link to a video here where I go through the poem in great detail. And you don't necessarily have to watch this video unless you really just are very lost. And it's okay if you are, because it's not an easy poem. There's a lot going on in it. The language isn't necessarily what we're used to. The syntax, when you remember we learned in chapter 17, how the syntax can be weird, word choices can be different, punctuation can throw us off. You know, it's not an easy poem to figure out quickly. It takes some time. So I go through it in detail in this video link right here, but I will say right now that basically what we just heard was a duke, a man, the speaker of the poem, the persona, who is having a one-sided conversation with another person. That other person is a representative. He is representing a count. The duke wants to marry the count's daughter, right? So the count has sent in this representative to sort of discuss things with the duke, right? Because marriage is more like a business transaction, right? Rather than a matter of love and heart. So that is who he is speaking to directly. It's almost like this is almost like a play, right? And this big, long, dramatic monologue poem is from a scene. And it's very reminiscent of Shakespeare, because Shakespeare wrote poetry, right? Sonnets, but Shakespeare is actually most well known, of course, for all of his plays. But if you don't know this, every single one of Shakespeare's plays is written as poetry. So you could have a scene, like for instance, Hamlet, one of the most famous pieces from any of Shakespeare's plays, the to be or not to be speech. To be or not to be, that is the question. That is a dramatic monologue. Technically a soliloquy, but we're not going to get into that. And, you know, Hamlet says this really long speech on stage by himself, right? That whole speech of to be or not to be is written as a poem. All of Shakespeare's plays are written as poems. It's almost like the same thing with My Last Duchess. It's almost like you could see this poem actually as a monologue in a scene from a play. And the count's representative would be on stage, right? And the duke would be standing there. We'd be, you know, we could see the painting behind the curtain. It's like it's a scene. Not all poems are like this, don't get me wrong. This is not necessarily a common thing. But it's a great example of creating a persona, because if you envision what's actually happening, you can see that this guy is a character that Robert Browning has created. So he's talking to this representative of the Count's and showing him this painting of his last Duchess. And he goes on to just, talk about his previous wife. And if you thought that she cheated on him, don't feel bad, because that's a pretty common assumption. But if you really dissect line by line, what we come to find out is the reason that he was upset with her was just because she was happy. And she showed the same level of happiness and gratitude for everything, right? So even if she's just watching the sunset, or one of the servants brings her a bowl of cherries from the orchard, or she's riding her mule around the terrace, all of those little things bring her joy. And it's like everything brings her the same amount of joy. Nothing is better than anything else. She is happy and thankful for all of it equally. And he has a big problem with that, because he's a duke. He has, he has done her this great service of choosing to marry her, agreeing to marry her and give her his name, a 900-year-old name, right? He should be placed on a pedestal. He should, she shouldn't give him the same smile that she gives the mule. She shouldn't be just as happy to see him as she is to see the mule or the sunset, right? He should be elevated, because he is way more special, and he can't handle it. But does he have a conversation with her about it? Yeah, because I would be stupid, and he never stoops. So it's almost like she had to be able to read his mind and change her ways to avoid the outcome that she got. But of course she couldn't read his mind. She had no idea what was going on. She probably had no idea he was even upset at all about anything. What was the outcome for her? He had her killed. This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. He had her killed because she liked the sunset and cherries and riding her mule, and did not elevate him enough. That is who we're dealing with. And he, again, remember, he is sharing all of this with the representative of the Count, whose daughter he's trying to marry. So yeah, make sure the Count's daughter, make sure your master's daughter knows to keep me up on a pedestal, or she might meet the same fate as my last Duchess. Character, huh? So what do we learn about this persona? Because it's a big one. Like, he's not a wallflower. Okay, he seems loving at first, right? And if you're not paying close enough attention, you might get to the end of the poem and still think that he is this loving, doting husband who is simply grieving his first wife, right? But no, if you pay close enough attention, he's really not loving at all. He is a very jealous and arrogant man. He's jealous of the silliest things. Think about all those small things that about the Duchess that upset him so much. Super jealous, super arrogant that, my gift of a 900 years old name, like that he deserved more than she gave him. And that, I don't know, I guess this would be arrogance. I don't know, maybe craziness, but arrogant enough to think that he could share this with this representative, who is then going to go pass this information along to the Count, that he feels he's so arrogant and full of himself that he thinks that this is okay, that there's nothing wrong with sharing this information that's going to make it back to the father of the woman he's now trying to marry. I know. He's very powerful and controlling, right? He says, that nobody gets to see the painting of the Duchess unless he draws back the curtain. So he is very much in control of who gets to view her. He's obviously controlling of the Duchess. He's controlling of this whole situation. And we know that he's going to be controlling of his new wife if the Count agrees to let her marry the Duke. He's very materialistic. He name drops a lot, in such a short period of time. He name drops Frau Pandolf and Klaus of Innsbruck, right? And it's a big deal. It's a status symbol that Frau Pandolf did this painting of his Last Duchess. It's a big deal that Klaus of Innsbruck cast the statue in bronze, the statue of Neptune taming the seahorse. Isn't it interesting that the piece that he points out at the end is Neptune taming a seahorse? Like, that's what he does. He tames. That's what the Duke does. He didn't give him any, but he doesn't really tame. He just kills. I don't know. It's very, very bizarre. But he has a bit of materialism to him, and he's definitely all about his status. Again, the whole point about how he gave her a 900-year-old name. And then he is a narcissist. The question here is, does he have an inflated sense of self-worth? You betcha. And he makes that pretty clear. And he's not, he makes no bones about it. Like, doesn't apologize for it, doesn't even think that it is something he should need to apologize for. He is a narcissist. And they come off very charming, very loving, but they are very jealous and controlling individuals. So again, another great example, just a great example of creating a persona. Now we're going to look at another one. And this one is also by Robert Browning. He's so good at this. So this one is called Porphyria's Lover. So let me get out of this and take a look here. All right. So again, by Robert Browning. The rain set early in tonight. The sullen wind was soon awake. It tore the elm tops down for spite and did its worst to vex the lake. I listened with heart fit to break. When glided in Porphyria, straight she shut the cold out and the storm, and kneeled and made the cheerless grate blaze up and all the cottage warm. Which done, she rose, and from her form withdrew the dripping cloak and shawl, and laid her soiled gloves by, untied her hat, and let the damp hair fall. And, last, she sat down by my side and called me. When no voice replied, she put my arm around her waist and made her smooth white shoulder bare, and all her yellow hair displaced, and stooping, made my cheek lie there, and spread over all her yellow hair, murmuring how she loved me. She, too weak, for all her heart's endeavor to set its struggling passion free, from pride and vainer ties dissever, and give herself to me forever. But passion sometimes would prevail, nor could tonight's gay feast restrain a sudden thought of one so pale for love of her, and all in vain. So she was come through wind and rain. Be sure I looked up at her eyes, happy and proud. At last I knew Porphyria worshipped me. Surprise made my heart swell, and still it grew while I debated what to do. That moment she was mine, fair, perfectly pure and good. I found a thing to do, and all her hair in one long yellow string I wound 3 times her little throat around and strangled her. No pain felt she. I am quite sure she felt no pain. As a shut bud that holds a bee, I warily oped her lids. Again laughed the blue eyes without a stain, and I untightened next the tress about her neck. Her cheek once more blushed bright beneath my burning kiss. I propped her head up as before, only this time my shoulder bore her head, which droops upon it still. The smiling rosy little head, so glad it has its utmost will, that all it scorned at once is fled, and I, its love, and gained instead. Porphyria's love. She guessed not how her darling one wish would be heard, and thus we sit together now, and all night long we have not stirred, and yet God has not said a word. Okay, so what we have here in the beginning, it's kind of a dark and stormy night, right? And he's waiting. Okay, first, Porphyria is the girl, right? Porphyria's lover is the speaker, the persona of this poem. He is Porphyria's lover, right? So Porphyria's lover is waiting, right? It's a dark and stormy night. And then Porphyria shows up and she, shuts the cold out. She gets the fire going. She comes, she takes off her cloak and shawl and her gloves and her hat, and her hair's all damp and falling all around her, She calls out for him. He doesn't say anything. No voice replied. So she comes to him and she sits next to him and she puts his arm around her waist, right? It's like she's moving to him. She has to move him, like he's just sitting there doing nothing. So she puts his arm around her waist and her shoulder is bare and her yellow hair is kind of, all around. And she kind of pulls his head down so that his cheek is resting on her shoulder and her hair again is all around him, murmuring how she loves him, right? And then he says, she, too weak for all her heart's endeavor to set its struggling passion free from pride and vainer ties to sever and give herself to me forever. What that's telling us is that while she is there with him now in this moment, and clearly there's something going on between them, there's something holding her back, right? To set its struggling passion free from pride and vainer ties dissever and give herself to me forever. It's almost like there's a reason why she can't be with him, for real, be with him. And really what it kind of makes us think of is that there's like some sort of status difference, like she's maybe a little higher class and he's lower class. And while she enjoys being with him, at least in these moments, she's not ready. She doesn't want to buck the system and, publicly be with him, right? So he says she's weak for it, all right? But passion sometimes would prevail, nor could tonight's gay feast restrain a sudden thought of one so pale for love of her, and all in vain. So it's like, but sometimes she couldn't, even though she won't buck the system and stand up and say that she's really with him, who cares what anybody else says or thinks, she can't stay away from him either, right? So she comes to see him through wind and rain, and he looks up at her eyes, happy and proud, and then in that moment he realizes that Porphyria worships me. Surprise made my heart swell. And he doesn't know what to do, right? And still it grew while I debated what to do. Oh my God, she actually worships me. She loves me. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Like, she's too weak to admit it publicly and so that we can truly be together. But I can see it in her eyes. She does love me. She worships me. What should I do? What should I do? Oh yeah, I'm going to kill her. So he literally takes her hair and strangles her with her own hair. And then sits her back on the couch and puts her shoulder or her head on his shoulder and just chills. They just chill on the couch. He's there with her corpse, and at the very end he says, all night long we have not stirred, and yet God has not said a word. I don't know where Browning comes up with these personas, but they are interesting individuals. So, yes, what is this about? This is about a man who strangles his beloved because he thinks that that's what she wants, that he is fulfilling her wishes so that she can be with him forever without having to find the strength and courage to go against society's standards. Porphyria's lover. Well, how would we describe this persona besides crazy? But that's a valid term. I think, I honestly think it's a valid term. Not just being hyperbolic and exaggerating. Like I feel like saying this persona is crazy. That tracks. But what we notice first about him, because obviously we don't really understand just how crazy he is until we get almost towards the end. In the whole first half of the poem, he seems very loving, right? He's very loving. He seems to really care about this woman. He's waiting for her. She seems lovely. I don't know, just seems like he is a very loving person. He seems very reasonable and calm. And surprisingly so, when he comes up with the idea to kill her and goes through with it. His tone doesn't change. He still sounds loving, but he's very reasonable and calm in a moment when you would expect him to be not reasonable or calm. He's choosing to kill her for a very bizarre reason, not that there's a good reason to kill someone, but it's very bizarre, and you'd expect that the pace of the poem would pick up or that something would change, right? Because it's like, what the heck is happening here? But it doesn't. He stays very reasonable and calm, even as he's killing her and telling us about it. This persona desires power, right? I think that there is that resentment that she is of a higher social status, and that's why she won't truly commit to being with him. And I think he desires that power over her, right? Because she is at a higher status than him. And part of that is heartbreaking because they can't truly be together, but then another part makes him resentful. And so this is like the ultimate power move. Why does he kill her? He thinks he's granting her one true wish, to be with him forever, right? And she's so weak, right? And he's putting himself in that position of power because in the reality is he has no power. Obviously, he has a little bit to be able to kill her, but generally speaking, and I have here at the end, is he a sociopath? Is he a psychopath? I'm not sure he's a psychopath. I don't know, maybe he is. I don't know. He's not sane. I don't think. It's crazy. But again, Robert Browning does a great job of creating personas. Because that's clearly not Browning. Okay, next one. Yes, Siren Song. All right. Look at this one. I love this poem. It makes me laugh. Siren Song. Okay, so if you don't know who the sirens are, they were these three women in Greek mythology, and they were kind of like out on this island in the ocean, and they had these beautiful, enchanting voices. And whenever men on ships would sail by, they'd hear the voices, and they would be overcome with, I don't know what you would want to call it, but they could not resist the call of the sirens, and they would jump overboard and swim to these sirens who would kill them. Beach, like there's skulls and skeletons, like there's all these signs that these three ladies are no good, but once they hear their voices are enchanting. And that's what they did. They wore sailors overboard to their death, essentially. So this is called Siren Song. This is the one song everyone would like to learn, the song that is irresistible, the song that forces men to leap overboard in squadrons, even though they see the beached skulls, the song nobody knows because anyone who has heard it is dead and the others can't remember. Shall I tell you the secret? And if I do, will you get me out of this bird suit? I don't enjoy it here squatting on this island looking picturesque and mythical with these two feathery maniacs. I don't enjoy singing this trio, fatal, valuable. I will tell the secret to you, only to you. Come closer. This song is a cry for help. Help me. Only you can. You are unique. At last. Alas, it is a boring song, but it works every time. So, very funny, I think. I think it's just a cute little poem. So these feathery maniacs are the sirens. And we have this one side, one of the persona of this poem is one of the sirens. And she is, basically saying, this is the song that everyone would like to learn, the song that is irresistible. But can I tell you a secret? Only you, the only one I trust. Can you get me out of this bird suit? Like, seriously, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't like this job. These two crazy ladies, I'm tired of them. I don't want to be here anymore. Can you get me out, please? You're the only one that can help me. You're special. You're unique, right? Drawing him in closer and closer, right? And then, alas, it is a boring song, but it works every time. So the irresistible nature of the song is to get the man to think that she's helpless and that she needs him to save her, to rescue her. And like it works like a charm every time. Every time the man hears, oh, I'll tell the secret, but only to you. You're special. You're unique. You're the only one that can save me. Please get me out of here. I don't want to be here anymore. Rescue me. Poor me. And it's just, that's the lore. That is the Siren Song. It's interesting. But again, we have a persona created here. This is not Margaret Atwood. She has created a persona in one of the sirens. And how would we describe this siren? Well, a lot of people, a lot of students, they will say, well, she's very helpless. Clearly she needs help. And it's like, well, if you get to the end of the poem and you still think she's helpless and truly wants help, then you have missed the point of the poem, because her helplessness is just an act. She's pretending to be helpless because that's what lures the sailor in. She knows that if she asks for help, if she asks him to save her, because he's so special, so unique, he can't resist. And then she gets him, right? She is not helpless in any way, shape, or form. That is an act. Some students read the poem and they think, God, she's so angry. Like she's very resentful, like she's feathery maniac, like she hates where she is. Okay. But is she really? Or is that part of the act? Pretending like she doesn't like it where she is, that she doesn't want to be in the bird suit, that she doesn't want to be singing this stupid song with these two other feathery maniacs. No, that is part of the act too. She is perfectly fine where she is. She likes it. What she really is untrustworthy and manipulative. She lures us in by pretending to be helpless and angry and resentful, and by playing to our ego that we're so special. But we're the only one she's going to tell the secret to. We're the only one who is unique enough to help her, to save her. Very manipulative. Right? And very opportunistic, right? She is seizing on this opportunity. And who knows, perhaps the sirens change their song. Perhaps they can get a good read on a person and know what type of enchantment is going to work the best. Because pretending to be the damsel in distress might not be the way that every guy gets got, right? But so she's seizing on that opportunity and his desire to save her, to be a hero. Very cunning, right? She's using all of this against us. But I would say the best term to describe the siren's persona is manipulative. right? It's very manipulative. The whole song, that's all it is, right? Okay, so let's move on and talk a little bit about tone, right? So we have this, we kind of understand what persona is a little bit now. And once we've kind of established who is speaking and what kind of a persona they're giving off, we can also start thinking about the tone of the poem, because these are the words coming out of that persona's mouth, right? As if they are speaking the lines of the poem. So we know a little bit about their persona. What tone are they putting off in the lines? We're going to look at My Papa's Waltz. And again, this is a poem that I use in the English 200 class in the discussions, so it might be familiar, right? But it's My Papa's Waltz by Theodore Redka. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. So there on the PowerPoint, there's a link to a video where it's a follow-up video for this poem where I go through it line by line and explain what's happening. And you can certainly watch that video. I will put it there for your use if you choose to, especially if you didn't have me for English 200 or if you've completely forgotten about this poem. That video is helpful. But what I will say is that this poem in particular, when we go back to what we learned in chapter 17 about paraphrasing and finding out the literal meaning of a poem first, this is the type of poem where that is essential. A lot of students read this poem and they have some very big assumptions about it. And those assumptions aren't, I don't want to say they're wrong, but they're not right. They're not totally wrong, but there's a reason they're there. So let's look at this poem. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy. Okay, so whoever that person is, the whiskey on your breath. There's so much whiskey on your breath. You've been drinking so much, your breath could make a small boy dizzy. Right? Lots of drinking, a lot of drinking. But I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. A waltz is a dance. And the timing of the waltz is just like the timing of this poem, the rhythm. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. Right? So even the rhythm of this poem imitates the dance of a waltz. Right? But I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. Hanging on like death, hanging on hard because this dance isn't easy. We're dancing, okay. Wasn't expecting that. We romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. Romping, very hard fun, play. We take children, toddlers, to romper rooms. We dress them in rompers. Romping means to have very hard physical fun. It's play, hard play, roughhousing, right? But it's play. It's fun. So we romped. We're also dancing, but the dancing is really hard, probably because we've been drinking so much. I hung on like death because you're drunk and this dance is not easy. And we're romping and playing and knocking things off the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. Well, clearly she's not happy we're knocking all this stuff from the kitchen shelf, right? That's what moms do. We stand there and watch everything we clean get destroyed again, right? The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. So you're holding my wrist and your knuckles are battered. I wonder what happened. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You've been drinking a lot of whiskey, so you're not real steady on your feet. At every step you miss of the waltz, the dance, every time you miss a step, my right ear scrapes your belt buckle. So that means I am only about waist high to you. So I'm still pretty young. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy. I am the small boy. You're my papa, my Papas Waltz. Right? You beat time on my head with a palm kicked hard by dirt. Dun, 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 dun. The time of the waltz, the timing of the waltz. One, one, one. With a palm caked hard by dirt. So you work with your hands, very dirty work, right? Your knuckles are also battered. I don't know if that's because of the work you do, or did you get in a fight? Maybe that actually is why your hands are dirty. Or maybe you fell because you're so drunk. Not quite sure yet, but your knuckles are battered up and your palm is caked hard by dirt. Then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. I'm clinging to your shirt because you're my dad. You're carrying me up to bed after this fun little romp around the kitchen trying to do the waltz. Reminds me of a kid who stands on their dad's or their grandpa's feet, right, to dance, right? But we have to keep in mind that Papa is drunk, missing steps. Seems like this is a very interesting situation. If you got through the poem and thought that the dad was beating the little boy, possibly the mother too, obviously we've gone through this line by line, and that is not what is literally happening. There is no indication of anything negative happening in this captured moment. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a reason why you thought it was abuse. Because the clues are there. There are some word choices and tone that kind of make us think that, you know? Again, if you go literally, paraphrase it line by line, this is a happy moment. This is a little boy who is dancing with his dad, having fun right before bed, right? But there are these other elements to it. We know that dad's been drinking quite a lot, and that's not necessarily abuse indicating, but we know that when a parent has been drinking that much, normally doesn't mean anything real good. But I hung on like death, right? Now we know what it means, literally, but again, that connotation, I hung on like death. So they've already put this image of death in our head in the first stanza. We romped until the pan slid from the kitchen shelf. It's really easy to gloss over the word romped and not really think about what it implies, what it indicates, and just think of romping like wrestling or fighting. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself, so we know mom's not happy. So that helps reinforce the idea that maybe dad is beating the little boy. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. So now we think he's grabbing his wrist like in a threatening way. And we see the word battered, knuckle, and battered wife syndrome, right? And knuckles battered, hitting, that clearly he's hitting the kid. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle, belt buckle, getting beaten with a belt, right? You beat time on my head, right? Really all dad's doing is just but beat time on the head. So again, we think dad's beating him, right? Then waltz me off the bed, still clinging to your shirt like I'm barely clinging to life. You beat the crap out of me. So it's really easy to see these words and the connotations that we have for them and think that this poem has a really dark, fearful tone. But when you paraphrase it and look at the literal meaning, it has a very light, joyful tone. It's the weirdest thing, right? How could there be two completely different tones in one poem? Well, maybe that's because the tone is actually more ambiguous because we have both the playful and the fearful. Can we have that paradox? Can we have that can it be both? Sort of, but that's why we would say really it's an ambiguous tone because it's playful and fearful at the same time. It's not just one section of it is playful and another section is fearful. It is literally playful and fearful at the same time, all the way throughout. And if you want to know the reason for that, or at least what I think is the reason, I think that, in this particular moment that the speaker is capturing, it was playful, it was enjoyable. He's looking back on these memories with his father and realizing that when he was a child, these things seemed fun. As an adult, though, he's looking back on the situation and realizing that dad was an alcoholic, right? And maybe that alcoholism affected the family, in other negative ways. Maybe he couldn't keep a job. Maybe, you know what I mean? Like maybe he died of alcoholism. Maybe, so there's definitely, the playful comes from how he saw it as a child. The fearful comes from how he knows it as an adult. It could also be that this particular moment with drunk dad was playful and happy, but come back tomorrow night and maybe it's going to be really angry, mean dad. Maybe that's where the fearful comes from, right? But it's definitely on purpose. It is there for a reason that you can, that it has this playful element and this fearful element, and it becomes very ambiguous, right? Okay, let's look at another one in terms of tone. We've got Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden. I think this one is a little easier to figure out, but a good one for tone. So, Those Winter Sundays. Sundays, too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. Then with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? This is about a man who's looking back on his childhood also and realizing how, even though at the time, how he grew up seemed very cold and angry, bitter, perhaps, that he did not realize everything that his father did for him and his family. Waking up early in the cold to get the fire started so that everyone else would be warm when they got up. Polishing his shoes, right? Going to work every day. And no one ever thanked him, right? And at the time, our speaker is just a resentful kid, but looking back on it, he realizes, wow, I didn't understand any of that. I didn't really understand my father at all. I am regretful of that. I feel kind of bad about that. It's a very, kind of makes me sad that looking back on it, no one ever thanked him for all these things he did. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? How lonely it is to be a parent sometimes. And all the things you do for your family with no thanks at all, without any recognition sometimes. They don't even realize that all the things you do, right? So he's looking back on that. So this one is very cold and somber. We get the cold from, that blue black cold, and how the, there's just a lot of cold imagery in the poem that adds to that sort of cold and somber tone. It's also very poignant. Like there's this emotional quality to it where he's looking back and realizing something very significant about his childhood. It's also very chastising. He's kind of chastising himself. Like, damn, I wasn't a very grateful child, was I? Like, I should have known better. I should have done better. Right? Great poem there for tone. And then the last one is Barbie by Marge Peterson. Well, out of that for everything else. Okay. Barbie doll. This girl child was born as usual and presented dolls that did pee-pee and miniature GE stoves and irons and wee lipsticks in color of cherry candy. Then in the magic of puberty, a classmate said, "You have a great big nose and fat legs." She was healthy, tested intelligent, possessed strong arms and back, abundant sexual drive and manual dexterity. She went to and fro, apologizing. Everyone saw a fat nose on thick legs. She was advised to play coy, exhorted to come on hardy, exercise, diet, smile, and wheedle. Her good nature wore out like a fan belt. So she cut off her nose and her legs and offered them up. In the casket, displayed on satin, she lay with the undertaker's cosmetics painted on, a turned up putty nose, dressed in a pink and white nightie. "Doesn't she look pretty?" everyone said. Consummation at last. To every woman, a happy ending. Very interesting things going on with the tone of this book. So if you didn't get it, girl grows up and, she's normal, average little girl. As she starts to hit puberty, one of her classmates says, "You have a great big nose and fat legs." And that sticks with her. And even though she's healthy and intelligent and, all these other things that would be seen as strengths, all everyone saw was a fat nose on thick legs, and she just goes around apologizing for it. And so she was advised to play coy, but then also she was advised to come on hardy, like, the mixed messages that girls get. She was told to exercise, to diet, to smile, and then finally she just couldn't take anymore. Her good nature wore out like a fan belt. She cut off her nose and her legs and offered them up. "I'm done." And then she's in the casket, put, a white night, pink and white nightie. The beautician's done her makeup, turned up putty nose, and everyone's like, "Oh, she looks so pretty." It's like, finally, I'm pretty. Consummation at last. But I had to kill myself to do it. To every woman, a happy ending. So we've got this very straightforward tone in the beginning. This girl child was born as usual and presented dolls that did pee-pee and miniature GE stoves and irons and wee lipsticks the color of cherry candy. It's just very matter of fact. Second stanza also matters that she was healthy, tested and intelligent, possessed strong arms and back, abundant sexual drive and manual dexterity. She went to and fro apologizing. Everyone saw a fat nose on thick legs. Just very straightforward, very matter of fact. Almost blasé, like there's no emotion involved in this. She was advised to play coy, so she cut off her nose and her legs and offered them up. Then that's where it kind of starts to take a turn, right? Then in the last stanza with, the cosmetics painted on and the turned up putty nose dressed in a pink and white nightie, "Doesn't she look pretty?" everyone said. The last two lines, we kind of get the final tone of the poem. Consummation at last. To every woman, a happy ending. Verbal irony. So If you don't pick up on the fact that she's being ironic, you think that she literally means that this was a happy ending for the Barbie doll, right? But no. This poor young girl was made to feel like she wasn't good enough because of her appearance, her legs and her nose. Even though she had all these other wonderful things going for her, all that stuck with her was what people said about her legs and her nose. And, you know, she tries to do it, whatever she can to get rid of them or to minimize them or make them more socially acceptable. And it doesn't work. So she just kills herself. And, you know, I don't know if we're supposed to think that she literally cut off her nose and her legs and offered them up, or if she killed herself in some other manner and it was like a figurative offering of her nose and legs, because those were the two things that everybody made fun of her for. But if you get to the end of that poem and you think that our speaker thinks that this really is a happy ending, then you have missed the irony, the verbal irony at the end there, right? So, so as I said, the tone there in Barbie doll, very straightforward for most of it. There's some gruesome parts too, cutting off her nose, right, and her legs. But the sarcasm and verbal irony are really what shine through at the end. So that straightforward business through most of the poem, that's a big part of the poem, that tone. And then the verbal irony at the end. And what do we make of the fact that we have this verbal irony, this really awful situation at the end, and she uses verbal irony there. And then the rest of the poem was so straightforward, kind of blasé. That almost like we hear this story isn't new. There's no need to have any other kind of emotion. She was born, she had all the normal stuff. She hit puberty, people started making fun of her. She was told to do this, told to do that, told to do this, told to do that, to make herself better, to make people like her more, to make herself more attractive. And finally, she couldn't deal with it anymore, so she kills herself. And then finally, in her coffin, everybody's like, "Oh, she's so pretty." And it's almost like that straightforward tone to most of the poem, with the verbal irony at the end, is like, how many times do we have to hear this? How many times do we have to hear the same story over and over and over again before we do something about it and change how women perceive themselves, society's expectations of them, etc.? I think that's why the straightforward tone comes through so much, kind of proving a point that while we might be horrified by what happens to the speaker in Barbie, well, not really to the speaker, but to the girl in Barbie doll, it's really not a new story at all. All right, so persona and tone. Those 6 poems will show up on your homework, and they will show up again on the drama and poetry exam. So this is your chance to really show that you have understood the personas in the first 3 poems, My Last Duchess, Porphyria's Lover, and Siren Song, as well as the tones of the other 3 poems, My Papa's Waltz, Those Winter Sundays, and Barbie Doll. That's what you're going to be asked to talk about in the homework assignments. That's what you're going to be asked to talk about on the drama and poetry exam when it comes to persona and tone. These 6 poems come back. Okay. All right. So if you have any questions about persona or tone, if you have any questions about the 6 poems that we focused on in this lesson, please reach out. Again, they're super, you want to make sure you have understood them fully. Otherwise, guys, are free to go ahead and move on to the next thing.